The telegram that arrived at the Oklahoma City land office on a sweltering June morning in 1882 changed everything for Ethan Ingram, though he would not know it until the clerk rode out to his failing ranch 3 days later with news that made his blood run cold. Ethan stood in the doorway of his weathered cabin, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief that had seen better days, listening to the clerk explain that the territorial government had passed a new ordinance. Any man holding more than 40 acres of grazing land had to be married within 60 days or forfeit half his property to the land office for redistribution. It was meant to encourage settlement, to bring more families westward, to civilize the Oklahoma Territory that had only recently been opened to non-native settlers. For Ethan, a 26-year-old bachelor who had poured 5 years of his life into building up his modest 100-acre spread, it felt like a death sentence. The clerk rode away in a cloud of dust, leaving Ethan alone with the reality of his situation. He had no sweetheart, no prospects, and barely enough money to keep his dozen cattle fed through the summer, let alone court a woman properly. His parents had died of fever 2 years back, and his only brother had moved to California chasing gold that never materialized. The ranch was all he had, every fence post a testament to his labor, every water trough a reminder of the future he had been trying to build. That evening, Ethan sat on his porch as the sun painted the prairie in shades of orange and red, considering his options. He could try to court one of the women in town, but most were already spoken for or had their sights set on men with better prospects. He could sell out and start over somewhere else, but the thought of abandoning the land his father had claimed made his chest tight with grief. Or he could do something desperate, something he had heard other men whisper about in saloons when they thought no one respectable was listening. He could advertise for a bride. The next morning, Ethan rode into Oklahoma City, a growing settlement that had sprung up almost overnight after the land run of 1889. The town was still rough around the edges, with wooden sidewalks and buildings that smelled of fresh cut lumber. He made his way to the newspaper office, a small building near the center of town where the editor, a portly man named Mr. Daniels, looked up from his typesetting with ink-stained fingers. "Help you?" Mr. Daniels asked, adjusting his spectacles. Ethan cleared his throat, feeling heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. "I need to place an advertisement for a wife." Mr. Daniels did not even blink. "You and half the territory, son. Cost you $2 for a month's run. What do you want it to say?" Ethan had practiced the words on his ride into town, but they still felt awkward on his tongue. "Rancher, 26, seeks wife for partnership on established cattle operation. Must be willing to work hard and live simply. Room and board provided, fair treatment guaranteed." Respond to Ethan Ingram, Oklahoma City Land Office. Mr. Daniels wrote it down, his pen scratching across the paper. "That's it. That's it. I will have it in this week's edition. Check back at the land office in about 10 days. Usually takes that long for the letters to start coming in, if any come at all. Ethan paid his $2, most of what he had left after buying supplies, and rode back to his ranch feeling like a fool. What kind of woman would respond to such an advertisement? What kind of man was he to resort to this? But desperation made men do strange things, and Ethan was desperate. 2 weeks passed in a haze of heat and hard work. Ethan mended fences, moved his cattle to better grazing, and tried not to think about the deadline that loomed like a thunderhead on the horizon. He had 43 days left. On a Tuesday morning, he rode back into town to check at the land office, expecting nothing. The clerk handed him a single envelope, thin and travel-worn with a postmark from Kansas. Ethan took it outside before opening it, his hand surprisingly steady. Inside was a single sheet of paper with writing so neat it looked like printing. The message was brief. I am available. 23 years old. Can cook and manage a household. No family ties. Will arrive in Oklahoma City on the 15th of July if you wire $20 for train fare. Name is Prudence Oakley. That was all. No explanation of why she was alone, no description of herself, no questions about him or his ranch. Just a stark statement of availability and a request for train fare. Ethan read the letter 3 times, standing in the shade of the land office awning. The 15th of July was 8 days away. He had 35 days left before the deadline. It was insane. She could be anyone. She could be old, infirm, or running from the law. She could arrive and take one look at his humble ranch and refuse to go through with it. But she could also be his only chance. He went to the telegraph office and wired the money, depleting what little savings he had left. Then he sent a second telegram. Money sent. I will meet you at the train station on the 15th. Ethan Ingram. The next 8 days were the longest of Ethan's life. He cleaned his cabin from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that had not seen a proper washing in months. He repaired the bedroom door that had been hanging crooked on its hinges. He even picked wildflowers and put them in a jar on the kitchen table before realizing how foolish that was and throwing them out. She was coming to marry him out of necessity, not romance. Flowers would not change that. The morning of the 15th dawned clear and hot. Ethan dressed in his best shirt, the one he saved for church on the rare occasions he attended, and rode into town 3 hours before the train was due. He spent the time checking his cattle prices at the stock office, buying a few supplies he did not need, and generally trying to keep his mind occupied. When the train whistle finally sounded in the distance, his heart began to hammer against his ribs. The locomotive pulled into the station in a cloud of steam and noise, and Ethan watched as passengers began to disembark. A businessman with a leather satchel, a family with 3 young children, an elderly couple moving slowly down the steps. Then he saw her. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun beneath a plain bonnet. Her dress was gray and patched in places, clearly well worn but clean. She carried a single carpet bag and stood on the platform looking around with an expression that betrayed nothing, not fear, not hope, not even curiosity. Ethan approached slowly, removing his hat. "Miss Oakley," she turned to him, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was something arresting about her features, something in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze that suggested strength. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and they studied him for a long moment before she nodded once. He waited for her to speak, to introduce herself properly, to ask questions about the journey or the ranch or their arrangement. But she said nothing, just stood there with her bag in her hand, waiting. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "I am Ethan Ingram. I appreciate you coming all this way. My ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I brought the wagon." She nodded again and followed him to where he had left his horse and wagon tied. He helped her up onto the seat, noticing how light she was, how her hands were calloused from work. She settled her bag at her feet and folded her hands in her lap, still silent. As Ethan drove them out of town, he attempted conversation. "Was the journey difficult?" She shook her head. "Have you traveled much before?" Another shake. "The ranch is not fancy, but it is solid. The cabin has 2 rooms and there is a good well. The land is decent for grazing, though we have had a dry summer." No response at all this time, just that steady gaze fixed on the horizon. By the time they reached the ranch, Ethan had given up trying to make her talk. Maybe she was shy. Maybe she had been taught that women should be quiet. Maybe she simply had nothing to say to a stranger who had bought her train ticket in exchange for marriage. He helped her down from the wagon and showed her into the cabin. She walked through the 2 rooms, the main living area with its stone fireplace and simple furniture, and the smaller bedroom with its iron-framed bed and washstand. She set her bag down and turned to him, waiting again. "I will sleep out here," Ethan said, gesturing to the main room. "You can have the bedroom. I know this is not a conventional arrangement. I want you to know that I will not force anything on you. The marriage is for the land, to meet the territorial requirement. Beyond that, we can figure things out as we go." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded and turned to unpack her bag. That evening, Ethan made supper, a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Prudence ate without comment, helping to clean up afterward with efficient, practiced movements. She washed dishes while he dried, and the silence between them was broken only by the splash of water and the clink of tin plates. When full dark had fallen and Ethan had lit the oil lamps, he broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "The land office says we need to be married within 30 days. There is a preacher in town who can do it. We could go this Saturday if that suits you." Prudence looked at him, then reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper and a pencil. She wrote something and handed it to him. Saturday is acceptable. So she could write but chose not to speak. Ethan was not sure if that made the situation better or worse. The next few days fell into a strange routine. Prudence took over the household tasks without being asked, cooking meals that were far better than anything Ethan had managed on his own, mending his clothes, and keeping the cabin spotless. She moved through her work with quiet efficiency, never complaining, never asking for anything. In the evenings, she would sit by the fireplace with needlework while Ethan reviewed his accounts or repaired tack, and the silence between them became almost companionable. Ethan found himself watching her when he thought she was not paying attention, trying to understand this woman who had agreed to marry a stranger. She was younger than him by 3 years, but there was something old in her eyes, a weariness that spoke of hardship. Sometimes he caught her staring out the window at the prairie, and her expression was so lost, so distant, that he wondered what she was running from, but he did not ask. They had an arrangement, nothing more. Saturday arrived too quickly. They rode into town together in the wagon, both dressed in their best clothes. Prudence wore a dress of dark blue that Ethan had not seen before, and she had tucked a few small flowers into her hair. The gesture touched him more than he wanted to admit. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, met them at the small church at the edge of town. He was an elderly man with kind eyes who asked no questions about their whirlwind courtship. In the Oklahoma Territory, such arrangements were common enough that they barely raised eyebrows. "Do you, Ethan Ingram, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Ethan said, his voice steady. "And do you, Prudence Oakley, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Prudence nodded, her face pale but composed. The preacher hesitated. "My dear, I need to hear you say the words." For a moment, Ethan thought she might shake her head and walk away, but she drew in a breath and whispered so quietly he almost missed it, "I do." It was the first time he had heard her voice. It was soft, slightly hoarse, as though unused to speaking. "Then by the power vested in me by the Oklahoma Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Ethan leaned forward and pressed a chaste kiss to Prudence's forehead, not her lips. It seemed too intimate, too much like claiming something she had not truly offered. She did not pull away, but she did not lean into him either. They signed the marriage certificate, and Reverend Matthews filed it with the land office immediately. Ethan Ingram was now a married man, his ranch secure. They returned home as the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold. Prudence made supper while Ethan tended to the horses, and they ate in their customary silence. But there was a weight to the quiet now, an awareness that everything had changed even if nothing felt different. After the dishes were washed and put away, Prudence went into the bedroom and closed the door. Ethan laid out his bedroll by the fireplace as he had every night since she arrived, but sleep eluded him. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the creak of the bed frame in the other room, wondering what Prudence was thinking, feeling, wanting. He must have dozed off eventually because he woke to the sound of the bedroom door opening. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in near darkness. Prudence stood in the doorway, outlined by the faint moonlight coming through the window. She wore a simple nightgown and had let her hair down, and in the dim light she looked younger, more vulnerable. Ethan sat up, his heart suddenly racing. "Is something wrong?" She walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. When she was close enough that he could see her face clearly, she knelt down beside his bedroll, her hands folded in her lap. Then, in that same soft voice she had used during the ceremony, she spoke. "I need to tell you why I answered your advertisement. I need to tell you why I do not speak." Ethan held his breath, afraid that any movement might break the moment. "My name is Prudence Oakley, and I am from a small town in Kansas," she began, her words coming slowly, as though she was pulling them from somewhere deep inside. "I grew up in a home where my father drank and my mother died young. When I was 17, my father sold me to a man who owned a saloon. He said it was to pay off his debts, but I knew it was just because he wanted to be rid of me." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp, but he forced himself to stay quiet to let her continue. "The man who bought me, his name was Mr. Carson. He was not kind. He put me to work in his saloon, and when I refused to do certain things, things that would have shamed me, he beat me. One night, he beat me so badly that I could not speak for a month. When my voice came back, I decided I would not use it again, not for men who saw me as property, not in a world where speaking up had only brought me pain." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. "I ran away 6 months ago. I took money from Mr. Carson's office, enough for a train ticket, and I disappeared. I have been moving from town to town, doing washing and mending, trying to stay ahead of anyone who might be looking for me. When I saw your advertisement, I thought maybe it was a chance for something different. A marriage of convenience, where I would not have to pretend to feel things I did not feel, where I could work and have a roof over my head without owing anyone anything." She looked up at him, and even in the dim light, he could see tears glistening on her cheeks. "But you have been kind to me, Ethan. You gave me space and respect, and you never demanded anything. Tonight, standing in that bedroom alone, I realized that I have been so afraid of being hurt again that I forgot how to be human. I forgot how to trust." Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took one of her hands in his. Her fingers were cold. "I am sorry for what was done to you. No person should be treated that way. You do not owe me your voice or your trust, Prudence. You do not owe me anything. But I want you to know that as long as you are here on this ranch, you are safe. I will never hurt you, and I will never let anyone else hurt you either." She squeezed his hand, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "I want to try. I want to try to be a real wife, not just a woman you married to keep your land. I want to try to speak again, to live again. But I do not know how. Then we will figure it out together. Ethan said. "We can take it slow. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people learning to be partners." Prudence nodded, and then, in a gesture that surprised them both, she leaned forward and rested her head against his shoulder. Ethan wrapped his arms around her carefully, as though she were something fragile and precious, and they sat there by the dying fire, holding each other in the darkness. It was not the passionate embrace of storybook lovers, but it was real, and it was the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. The next morning, Prudence spoke again at breakfast, her voice still soft but growing steadier with each word. "The coffee is good." Ethan looked up from his plate, a smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, though I think we both know your cooking puts mine to shame." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I have had more practice." From that day forward, Prudence spoke more often, though she was never what anyone would call talkative. She chose her words carefully, and there were still times when she retreated into silence, especially when they went into town and she was surrounded by strangers. But in the privacy of their ranch, she began to open up. She told him about her childhood in Kansas, the good memories before her mother's death. She had loved reading, though books had been scarce, and she had a gift for remembering poetry. Sometimes in the evenings, she would recite verses from memory, her voice taking on a musical quality that made Ethan's chest ache with unexpected emotion. In turn, Ethan shared his own story. He told her about his parents, how they had made the land run with dreams of building something lasting, how they had worked themselves to exhaustion trying to make the ranch profitable. He told her about his brother, about the loneliness of the past 2 years, about the fear that had gripped him when he received news of the marriage requirement. "I never thought I would marry," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I always figured I would end up a lonely old bachelor, stubborn and set in my ways. I never imagined I would find someone like you." Prudence turned to him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Someone broken, someone brave," he corrected gently. "Someone who survived things that would have destroyed other people. Someone who keeps getting up every morning and choosing to try again." She looked away, but he saw color rise in her cheeks. "You make me sound heroic. I am just trying to stay alive." That takes a kind of courage, too. As summer gave way to fall, the ranch began to show signs of prosperity. With Prudence managing the household, Ethan had more time to focus on the cattle and the land. He purchased 3 more head at auction with money he had saved from not having to hire seasonal help. Prudence's cooking meant they could feed hands during busy times without going into debt. She also proved to have a sharp mind for numbers, taking over the account books and finding ways to economize that Ethan had never considered. But more than the practical benefits, Ethan found himself falling in love with his wife. It happened gradually, in small moments that accumulated like drops of water filling a well. The way she hummed while she kneaded bread, unconscious and off-key but somehow perfect. The way she laughed when one of the barn cats brought her a dead mouse as an offering, a real laugh that started deep in her belly and made her eyes crinkle. The way she looked in the morning with her hair loose around her shoulders, sleepy and unguarded. He did not tell her, afraid that confessing his feelings would put pressure on her, would make her feel obligated to reciprocate. Their marriage was built on honest need and mutual respect, and he did not want to risk that foundation by introducing complicated emotions. But it was hard to hide how he felt, especially when she started to touch him more often. A hand on his arm when she passed him his coffee, her shoulder brushing his as they worked together to repair a fence. Once, when he came in from a long day of moving cattle, exhausted and covered in dust, she had washed his hair for him, her fingers gentle against his scalp, and he had nearly wept from the simple intimacy of it. Winter came early that year, with cold winds sweeping down from the north and temperatures dropping well below freezing. The cabin, which had seemed spacious in summer, felt small and cozy as they huddled close to the fireplace. One particularly bitter night in December, Ethan woke to find Prudence standing over him, wrapped in a quilt. "I am cold," she said simply. He sat up, concerned. "Is the fire in the bedroom out? I can rebuild it." "No, it is burning, but the room is still cold and I am alone." She hesitated, then added, "I do not want to be alone tonight." Ethan understood what she was asking and his heart began to pound. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." He stood and followed her into the bedroom, both of them aware that they were crossing a threshold they had not approached in the 6 months of their marriage. The bedroom was indeed cold, despite the small fire burning in the grate. The bed, which had been Prudence's solitary domain, suddenly seemed like the warmest place in the world. They lay down together, and Prudence curled into his side, her head on his chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, feeling the way she fit against him, perfect and right. "Ethan." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, I think I might be falling in love with you." His breath caught. "You think?" "I have never been in love before. I do not know what it is supposed to feel like. But when I am with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. And when you are away from the ranch, I miss you." "Is that love?" Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I think it might be. And for what it is worth, I know I am in love with you. I have been for a while now." She tilted her head up to look at him, and in the firelight her eyes were luminous. "Really, really. You are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement." Prudence reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Then she kissed him, not the chaste press of lips they had shared at their wedding, but a real kiss, deep and searching and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Prudence smiled. It was the first full, genuine smile he had ever seen from her, and it transformed her face into something radiant. "Make love to me," she whispered. "Not because we are married, but because I want you to, because I choose you." "Are you sure?" Ethan asked again, needing to be certain. "I am sure. I am choosing this. I am choosing you." So he did, with tenderness and care, taking his time to learn every inch of her, to show her with his body what words could not fully express. And Prudence, who had been so broken by cruelty, opened herself to him with a trust that felt sacred. Afterward they lay tangled together and Prudence cried, but they were good tears, healing tears. Ethan held her until she fell asleep, and he stayed awake long into the night, listening to her breathe, marveling at the strange and beautiful path that had led them to this moment. When spring returned to the Oklahoma Territory in 1883, the ranch was thriving. Word had spread that Ethan Ingram had married well, and several neighboring ranchers approached him about combining herds for a cattle drive north. It was an opportunity to make real money, but it would mean being away from the ranch for nearly 2 months. Ethan discussed it with Prudence over breakfast one morning. "I hate to leave you alone that long, but the profit could set us up for years. We could buy more land, expand the herd, maybe even build a bigger house." Prudence considered this, then said, "I will not be entirely alone. Mrs. Patterson down the road has offered to teach me more about preserving food, and I could stay with her some nights if I get nervous." "You are not afraid?" She shook her head. "I was afraid before because I was running, but this is home now. I am not running anymore." The conviction in her voice made Ethan's chest swell with pride. "All right then, I will go. But I will write to you every chance I get, and I will be back before you know it." The day Ethan left, Prudence packed him enough food for a week and kissed him goodbye with a passion that made the other drovers whistle and catcall. She ignored them, her attention focused solely on her husband. "Come back to me," she said. "Always," he promised. The 2 months Ethan was gone were the longest of Prudence's life, but they were also transformative. Without her husband there to lean on, she was forced to stand on her own, and she discovered that she was stronger than she had thought. When a windstorm damaged part of the barn roof, she climbed up and patched it herself. When a neighboring rancher tried to let his cattle graze on Ethan's land without permission, she confronted him with such fierce determination that he apologized and moved them immediately. She also made friends, real friends, for the first time in years. Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 50s who ran her own small ranch, became both mentor and confidante. There was also a young woman named Sarah who worked at the general store in town, and they bonded over a shared love of books. Prudence started borrowing volumes from Sarah's small collection, rediscovering the joy of reading that she had lost years ago. The letters from Ethan arrived sporadically, carried by riders heading back to Oklahoma City. They were not eloquent, but they were honest, full of details about the drive and expressions of how much he missed her. Prudence kept them tied with a ribbon in her dresser drawer and reread them when she was lonely. When Ethan finally returned in late May, brown from the sun and bearing a money belt full of their earnings, Prudence ran to meet him. She threw herself into his arms with such force that she nearly knocked him over, kissing him in front of everyone. "I missed you," she said, and her voice was clear and strong. "I missed you too," he replied, spinning her around. "But look at you, you are glowing. What happened while I was gone?" "I learned that I could stand on my own 2 feet," she said. "And I learned that I did not want to. I want to stand beside you as your partner and your equal." That night, after they had celebrated his return and discussed plans for the ranch's expansion, Prudence had news of her own. "I think I am pregnant," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Ethan's eyes went wide. "You think?" "I am fairly certain. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings. Mrs. Patterson says those are the signs." Joy and fear warred in Ethan's chest. "Are you happy about it?" Prudence smiled, that full, radiant smile that still took his breath away. "I am terrified. But yes, I am happy. I never thought I would have children, never thought I would have a real family, and now I am going to have both." Ethan pulled her close, resting his hand over hers on her stomach. "We are going to be parents. We are going to be parents," she repeated, wonder in her voice. The pregnancy was not easy. Prudence suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first 3 months, and as she grew larger, the Oklahoma heat made her miserable. But she bore it all with the same quiet strength she brought to everything, and Ethan marveled at the changes in her body, the way she blossomed with new life. They spent the long summer evenings preparing for the baby, setting up a cradle in the corner of the bedroom that Ethan had carved from oak. Prudence sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle moving with practiced precision. They argued good-naturedly about names, finally settling on Emma if it was a girl and Elijah if it was a boy. In January of 1884, on a night when snow was falling soft and thick outside the cabin, Prudence went into labor. Mrs. Patterson arrived to help, along with another ranch wife who had birthed 7 children of her own. Ethan was banished to the main room where he paced and prayed and tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. The labor lasted 14 hours, and by the end, Ethan was nearly out of his mind with worry. But then he heard it, the sharp, indignant cry of a newborn baby. Moments later, Mrs. Patterson emerged, smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing fine, though she is exhausted." Ethan rushed into the bedroom to find Prudence propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair, wailing at the top of his lungs. "Elijah," Prudence said, looking down at their son with such love that Ethan felt his eyes burn with tears. "His name is Elijah." Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son, this tiny person who had not existed before, and felt his entire world shift. "He is perfect. He has your nose," Prudence said, touching the baby's tiny face. "Poor kid." She laughed, then winced. "Do not make me laugh. Everything hurts." Over the next weeks, they fell into the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood. Elijah was a demanding baby, waking every few hours to nurse, and Prudence was often so tired she could barely stand. But there was joy, too, in watching their son grow and change, in seeing him smile for the first time, in listening to his babbling attempts at speech. Ethan took on more of the household tasks, cooking meals and doing laundry while Prudence focused on the baby. He had hired a young man named Tom to help with the ranch work, which gave him more flexibility to be present for his family. One evening, when Elijah was 3 months old and finally sleeping through most of the night, Prudence looked at Ethan across the dinner table and said, "I need to tell you something." His heart clenched with sudden fear. "What is it?" "I am happy," she said simply. "I just realized it sitting here with you and Elijah. I am truly, completely happy. I never thought I would be able to say that." Relief washed over him, followed by a wave of emotion so strong he had to blink back tears. "I am happy too. You and Elijah, you are everything I never knew I needed." "We should write to the land office," Prudence said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Thank them for that marriage requirement. Tell them it was the best thing that ever happened to us." Ethan laughed. "I am not sure they would appreciate the irony, maybe not, but it is true." As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. Ethan made 2 more successful cattle drives, and with the profits, they were able to purchase an additional 40 acres from a neighbor who was moving back east. They built a larger house, a proper 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms and a parlor. It was not grand by city standards, but it was a palace compared to the small cabin where they had started their life together. Elijah grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, mimicking his walk and his speech. When he was 2, Prudence became pregnant again, and this time she carried the baby with much less difficulty. Their daughter, Emma, was born in the spring of 1886, a tiny thing with her mother's dark eyes and a surprisingly loud voice for someone so small. Prudence proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but also firm when needed. She taught both children to read at an early age, using the growing collection of books that Sarah continued to loan her. Ethan taught them to ride and to care for the animals, instilling in them the same work ethic his parents had taught him. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that tested their resources and winters that were brutal in their cold. Elijah broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 6, and Emma nearly died from fever when she was 4. But they weathered each crisis together, their bond growing stronger with each challenge overcome. The turning point in Prudence's full healing came in the summer of 1889, 7 years after their wedding. She and Ethan had taken the children into Oklahoma City for supplies when a man approached them on the street. Prudence Oakley." Prudence turned, and Ethan saw all the color drain from her face. The man was in his 50s, well-dressed but with cruel eyes that made Ethan's hands curl into fists. "Mr. Carson," Prudence whispered. So this was the man who had bought her, who had beaten her, who had stolen her voice. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between his wife and this specter from her past. "You need to leave," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. Mr. Carson ignored him, his attention fixed on Prudence. I have been looking for you for years. You stole from me and I want my money back. Plus interest. She does not owe you anything, Ethan said. That is between me and her. This is none of your concern. She is my wife. That makes it very much my concern. For the first time, Mr. Carson seemed to notice Ethan's size, the breadth of his shoulders, the hardness in his eyes. He took a step back but rallied. She is a thief. I could have her arrested. Prudence found her voice then, stepping out from behind Ethan. You will do no such thing. You held me against my will, you abused me, and the money I took was a fraction of what you owed me for 2 years of labor. If you try to pursue this, I will tell the marshal exactly what kind of establishment you were running and what you forced the women there to do. Mr. Carson's face reddened with anger. You always were too smart for your own good. Fine, keep the money. But do not think you got away with anything. You are still nothing but a saloon girl playing at being respectable. Before Ethan could respond, Prudence stepped forward and slapped Mr. Carson across the face with enough force to snap his head to the side. I am a rancher's wife, a mother, and a landowner. I am respected in this community, and I have more courage in my smallest finger than you have in your entire body. You are the nothing, Mr. Carson. You are a small, cruel man who only has power over people when you can trap them. Well, I am free now and you have no power over me anymore. Mr. Carson stumbled back, shock written across his features. He looked from Prudence to Ethan, saw the united front they presented, and seemed to deflate. Without another word, he turned and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd on the street. Prudence was shaking, but when Ethan put his arm around her, she stood tall. I spoke up, she said, wonder in her voice. I spoke up and he left. You were magnificent, Ethan said. That night, after the children were asleep, Prudence cried in Ethan's arms, but they were tears of release, of finally letting go of the last chains that bound her to her past. I am free, she kept saying. I am finally free. You have always been free, Ethan told her. From the moment you chose to answer my advertisement, from the moment you chose to trust me, you have been free. I just helped you see it. More children followed. A second son, James, was born in 1891, and another daughter, Grace, in 1894. The house rang with laughter and noise, with the chaos of a large and loving family. Prudence never lost her tendency toward quietness, but she spoke when she had something to say, and her children learned that when their mother talked, it was worth listening. The ranch prospered beyond anything Ethan had imagined when he first placed that desperate advertisement in the newspaper. They became one of the most successful operations in the Oklahoma Territory, known for the quality of their cattle and the fairness with which they treated their workers. Ethan and Prudence reinvested their profits into the community, helping to fund a schoolhouse and later a library in town. As the new century approached, Ethan and Prudence found themselves looking back on the strange path that had brought them together. They were sitting on the porch of their house one evening, watching the sunset paint the prairie in brilliant colors, when Prudence said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not answered your advertisement?" Ethan considered this. You would have found your way somehow. You are too strong not to, maybe, but I do not think I would have found happiness. I do not think I would have found love. I know I would not have, Ethan said. I would have lost half the ranch and spent the rest of my life bitter and alone. You saved me, Prudence. She shook her head. We saved each other. It was true. They had come together out of desperation and necessity, two broken people trying to survive in a harsh world. But somewhere along the way, in the quiet moments of daily life, in the shared struggles and small victories, they had built something real and lasting. They had built a love that was not based on passion or romance, though those things had come in time, but on respect and partnership, and the choice to keep choosing each other, day after day. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Elijah was 18 now, a young man preparing to start his own ranch on land his parents had helped him purchase. Emma was 16, sharp-minded and already talking about becoming a teacher. James was 11, quiet like his mother but with a gift for working with animals. And Grace was 8, the baby of the family and a force of nature who kept everyone on their toes. They had invited friends and neighbors, and the house was full of music and food and joy. At one point, Sarah, now a married woman herself with 3 children, pulled Prudence aside. "I remember when you first came to town," Sarah said. "You were so quiet, so guarded. Look at you now, you are different." Prudence smiled. "I found my voice, and more importantly, I found people worth using it for." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the children had been sent to bed, Ethan and Prudence stood in the yard, looking up at the stars. 20 years, Ethan marveled. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. "I was so scared on our wedding day," Prudence admitted. "I almost backed out a dozen times. I thought I was making a terrible mistake." "What changed your mind?" "The way you looked at me during the ceremony. Like I mattered. Like I was a person, not just a solution to your problem." I had not been looked at that way in so long that I had forgotten what it felt like. Ethan pulled her close. "You have always mattered. From that first moment on the train platform, you mattered." They stood there in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, and Prudence thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the frightened, broken girl who had answered an advertisement from a desperate rancher. She thought about the woman who had whispered her wedding vows, afraid to use her voice. She thought about the moment she had finally spoken from her heart on their wedding night, taking the first step toward healing. And she thought about all the moments since then. The first time she had laughed without fear. The first time she had held her baby in her arms. The first time she had stood up to her abuser and reclaimed her power. The thousands of ordinary days that had woven together to create an extraordinary life. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now after 20 years of practice. "I love you too," Ethan replied. "Always and forever." They went inside together, hand in hand, to the home they had built and the life they had created. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under the stars, wild and free and beautiful. The Oklahoma Territory became the state of Oklahoma in 1907, and Ethan and Prudence celebrated along with their neighbors. They were in their 50s now, their children grown or nearly so. Elijah had married and given them their first grandchild, a daughter named Prudence after her grandmother. Emma had indeed become a teacher and was making a difference in the lives of children across the county. James was running the day-to-day operations of the ranch with skill and dedication. And Grace was attending a women's college back east, determined to study law. Ethan's hair had gone silver, and Prudence had lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun and smiling at her family. But they were still strong, still active, still deeply in love. One winter evening, as they sat by the fire in the parlor, Prudence was working on a quilt for their newest grandchild while Ethan read the newspaper. It was a scene they had enacted thousands of times, comfortable and familiar. "You have any regrets?" Ethan asked suddenly, lowering his newspaper. Prudence looked up, surprised by the question. "About what?" "About your life. About answering my advertisement. About all of this." She set down her needle and thread, considering her answer carefully. "I regret the things that happened to me before I met you. I regret that it took so much pain to bring me to the point where I was desperate enough to marry a stranger. But I do not regret a single moment since I stepped off that train in Oklahoma City. Even the hard times, the losses, and the struggles, I do not regret them because we faced them together." Ethan smiled, his eyes warm. "That is how I feel too. I just wanted to make sure you were happy." "I am happy," Prudence said firmly. "I have been happy for a very long time." "You gave me that, Ethan. You gave me a safe place to heal, a reason to find my voice again, and a love that has sustained me through everything. I could not ask for more." They fell back into comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire and the tick of the mantel clock the only sounds. But it was a silence full of understanding, of shared history, of a love that had grown deeper and richer with each passing year. When grandchildren visited, they always wanted to hear the story of how their grandparents met. Ethan and Prudence would exchange glances and smile before Ethan began. "Well," he would say, "it started with a piece of paper and a prayer." And Prudence would add, "And it became a love story that changed both of our lives." They would tell about the advertisement, about the silent weeks before the wedding, about the moment on their wedding night when Prudence finally spoke. The children would listen with wide eyes, fascinated by this tale of their practical, steady grandparents having such a dramatic beginning. What they did not always tell was the depth of the pain that had preceded their meeting, or the years of slow healing that followed. Those parts were private, sacred in their intimacy. But the children could see the results in the way their grandparents looked at each other, in the way they moved together like two parts of a whole, in the way their hands found each other automatically across a table or in a crowded room. As Ethan and Prudence entered their 60s, they began to slow down. The ranch was in James's capable hands now, and they spent more time traveling to visit their scattered children and growing brood of grandchildren. They also spent time simply being together, taking long walks across the land they had built their life on, reminiscing about the past and marveling at the present. One spring afternoon, when wildflowers carpeted the prairie in a riot of color, they rode out to a hill that overlooked their property. It was a spot they had come to often over the years, a place where they could see the fruits of their labor spread out before them. "Remember when all this was nothing but grass and hope?" Ethan asked. Prudence leaned against his shoulder. "I remember. I remember thinking that it was the loneliest, most beautiful place I had ever seen. It felt like the end of the world. And now it feels like home. It feels like the center of everything that matters." They sat in silence for a while, watching the cattle graze in the distance, seeing the house they had built standing solid and sure. Then Prudence turned to Ethan, her dark eyes serious. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not spend your last years alone. Promise me you will let our children take care of you, that you will accept help and love and not be stubborn." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "Do not talk about that. You are going to outlive me by decades." "We do not know that, and I need to know that you will be all right. You saved me, Ethan. You gave me a life worth living. I need to know that you will keep living too, even after I am gone." He pulled her close, his throat tight with emotion. "I promise, but you have to promise me the same thing. If I go first, you keep living. You keep being the strong, amazing woman I fell in love with." "I promise," she whispered. They held each other on that hilltop, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. Their love was not just in the passion they shared, though that had remained strong through the years. It was in the ranch they had built, in the children they had raised, in the community they had helped create. It was woven into the very fabric of the land itself, permanent and enduring. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost friends to age and illness. They celebrated the marriages of more grandchildren and the births of great-grandchildren. They watched as automobiles began to replace horses, and as the world around them changed in ways they could never have imagined when they first met. But through it all, they had each other. Ethan and Prudence, the rancher and the stranger who spoke her first words on their wedding night. Their love story had become legend in Oklahoma City, held up as an example of how something beautiful could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, they were in their 70s, both moving more slowly but still sharp in mind and spirit. The entire family gathered for a massive celebration, with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren filling the house and spilling out onto the lawn. Emma had compiled letters and photographs into a book chronicling their life together, and she presented it to them with tears in her eyes. "You showed us what love looks like," she said. "Not the easy kind, but the kind that chooses to stay, to work, to grow. Thank you for that gift." Ethan and Prudence held hands as they looked through the book, marveling at the life they had lived. There were photographs from their early years when they were young and the land was raw. Pictures of their children at various ages, of cattle drives and harvests, of Christmases and birthdays. Each image was a memory, a moment captured in time, evidence of a life fully lived. That evening, after the celebration had wound down and only immediate family remained, Prudence stood to make a speech. Her voice was not as strong as it had been, but it carried clearly in the quiet room. 50 years ago, I was a broken woman with no hope and no future. I had lost my voice and almost lost my will to live. Then I saw an advertisement in a newspaper, and I made a choice that changed everything. I chose to take a chance on a stranger, to travel to a place I had never been, to marry a man I had never met. It was the scariest thing I had ever done, and it was the best decision I ever made. She turned to Ethan, who was watching her with eyes full of love. "You gave me everything, Ethan. You gave me safety and respect and time to heal. You gave me love when I did not think I was capable of receiving it. You gave me children and grandchildren and a legacy that will continue long after we are gone. You gave me my voice back, and more importantly, you taught me that I was worth listening to." Ethan stood and took her hands. "You are the bravest person I have ever known. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you came through it with your spirit intact. You taught me what real strength looks like. You taught our children to speak up for themselves, to never settle for less than they deserve, to build lives of meaning and purpose. Everything good in my life came from the day you stepped off that train in Oklahoma City." They kissed then, in front of their assembled family, and there was not a dry eye in the room. It was not the passionate kiss of youth, but something deeper, a kiss that spoke of decades of partnership, of weathering storms together, of choosing each other over and over again. The celebration continued into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. And when Ethan and Prudence finally retired to their bedroom, exhausted but happy, they lay in each other's arms and reflected on the miracle of their life together. "I never thought we would make it this far," Ethan admitted. "When we married, I thought we would be strangers who shared a house. I never imagined this." "I never imagined I could be this happy," Prudence replied. "I thought happiness was for other people, not for broken girls from Kansas. But you showed me I was wrong." They fell asleep holding hands as they had every night for 50 years, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and built a love that had stood the test of time. Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 76. Prudence was beside him when he went, holding his hand and whispering words of love. The loss nearly broke her, but she remembered her promise. She kept living, kept being present for her children and grandchildren, kept finding reasons to smile even through her grief. She lived 5 more years, long enough to see another generation born, long enough to finish the family history she had been writing, long enough to know that the love she and Ethan had built would continue through their descendants. On a warm summer evening in 1939, Prudence sat on the porch of the house she and Ethan had built, surrounded by family. Her eldest great-granddaughter, a girl of 6 named Lucy, climbed into her lap. "Tell me about Grandpa, Ethan," Lucy asked, as children often did. Prudence smiled, her eyes drifting to the prairie beyond, seeing not just what was there but all the years that had passed. "Your great-grandfather was the best man I ever knew. He was kind and patient, strong and gentle. He saved my life, not just once but every single day we were together." "How did he save you?" Lucy asked. "He gave me a place to belong. He showed me that I was worth loving, and he taught me to use my voice to speak up for what I believed in, to never be silent in the face of injustice or cruelty." "I miss him," Lucy said, though she had been only a toddler when Ethan died. "So do I," Prudence replied. "But he is not really gone. He is in this land, in this family, in the values he taught us. As long as we remember him and live according to what he believed in, he will always be with us." That night, Prudence passed away peacefully, surrounded by the family she and Ethan had created. She was 79 years old and had lived a life that spanned from the wild days of the Oklahoma Territory to the modern era, a life that had been transformed by love and courage, and the choice to keep trying even when everything seemed impossible. They buried her beside Ethan on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the endless Oklahoma sky. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact she had made. Person after person stood to speak about how Prudence had helped them, encouraged them, inspired them. The quiet woman who had almost lost her voice had ended up touching hundreds of lives. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations. The house stood solid and sure, sheltering new families, new love stories, new dreams. And on summer evenings, when the light hit the prairie just right, it was said you could almost see them there, Ethan and Prudence, walking hand in hand across the land they had loved, eternal and inseparable. Their story became the stuff of family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The poor rancher who had married a quiet stranger to keep his land. The woman who had spoken her first words on their wedding night and had gone on to find her voice and her strength. Two people who had come together out of desperation, but had created a love that endured beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything they could have imagined that day when Prudence stepped off the train in Oklahoma City with a single carpet bag and a heart full of fear and hope. It was not a perfect love story, because real love never is. It was messy and difficult and required daily choice and commitment. But it was real and it was theirs, and in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.